Welcome, viewer, to this edition of Pan-African Friday Pan-African program that comes your way all the way from Nile Avenue here in Kampala, courtesy of UBC. Today in the studio again, my name is James Mtuta, and of course I'm joined by the usual panelists, Rachel Tagali and the Pan-African man of Uganda, Ndugu Dan Rugarama. And today we'll be looking at a number of issues. Of course, this program comes your way to look at issues that concern us, the people of the African continent, and of course beyond those who live in Africa and outside of Africa, as long as you have the African roots, but also if you believe in the progress and the development of the African continent. Last week we had a discussion here, and many people have received some of the responses and some of the questions that people are putting across, and a number of issues that I wanted us to look at before we go in our usual week and the what has been trending on the continent. Ndugu Cheyune, the RDC we were with here, made a statement. And I think I remember said maybe that would be an issue for discussion for another day. And I've now seen people responding, asking if that is what we believe and that's what we hold. He said that people make God. And so I think it became a bit a concern to many people. And you can tell you that he will one time come back to explain what he meant, because we cannot explain what he meant, since that is not what we believe, that people can make God, can create God rather. We believe that God create people and create humans. So I think for that one, Ndugu Cheyune will be here himself to explain. Another question was, religion. Is religion a uniting factor, or is religion a dividing factor? Now, when one is talking about religion, is not talking at a single line of thinking. I think religion is multifaceted. We have many religions and people believe differently. So I think we'll begin looking at that before we go into how our week has been. I think we can respond to some of these concerns by our viewers. I will begin with the Ndugu Rugarama. Is this issue of religion more a uniting or a dividing factor?
Thank you so much, Comrade Mtuta. Good morning to our viewers from wherever you may be viewing from. This is rather not the usual way we usually commence, and I think a change for once is a plus on your part, Comrade Mtuta. And
we'll have time, one time here, to talk about issues of religion in perspective of the African.
In depth.
Yeah.
Okay, now, very quickly, the two issues which we have raised, and I think it is always good when we have a presentation and the public comes up to pick up some issues and say, is this certainly the views that I expressed here, maybe you should have that disclaimer. Not necessarily the views of UBC media, but the views of those panelists who express them. Yes, that is very important. So I want to believe those were the views of Comrade Cheyune, and he may share them with some people here or elsewhere. But let me just say on my part that it is very unfortunate that religion, the way it was imparted to us, as especially on the African continent, being Anglican and being Catholic, being Muslim, especially those three, was brought in the sense of, that marks people out as being distinct and different from others. So to that extent, the thinking that it was for dividing purposes, that kind of reasoning is true to a very great extent. And however, if you want to know that, then you have to look at the African continent and the wars we have fought. There are a number of religious wars we have fought in the past, and we are still fighting, simply because of differences in religion. But at the same time, within the faith, the religion itself, because one must ask himself or herself, what was Jesus Christ, whom we all claim, save for maybe Muslims, to follow the concept of the Trinity, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, for those in the Christian faith, Catholic or Anglican. What was Jesus' religion? So this religion thing is a creation of man. Now, if that's what Comrade Chaine was talking about, that we create God. Because how was God? And again, that is taking us, and you warned me, not to go into the depths of it. But you see, here is the Pan-African man, and you must risk when you ask such a question. But I will control my depths of discussion into this by saying that Jesus didn't have a religion. Jesus was not Anglican. Certainly Jesus was not Roman Catholic. Jesus was not a Muslim. Now you can forgive the Muslims because they don't follow that. But at least for us, we are into, by us I mean the Anglican and the
but even Muslims believe in the existence of Jesus.
Isa.
So, yes.
Isa. But that's not what they follow. For us, we follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. At least that's what we have been taught all the way. But the religious affiliations should not define and divide what we are supposed to be as human beings. Unfortunately, they do. To the extent that in the past, we all know, historically speaking, especially here in Uganda, and I believe our story in Uganda was the same story on the African continent and elsewhere. It has just a little bit died down in Uganda, simply because of probably the NRM and the way it has done its things, and probably the evolution. You know, people evolve. But it was unheard of for an Anglican to go and marry from a Roman Catholic family. It was not possible, you know, and vice versa. Now it is a little bit difficult. They may not say, they say it mutedly, for you to go and penetrate, although it happens at a limited scale, a Muslim family, and you are not of the same faith. So to that extent, you can see there are all sorts of, you look at politics, by the way, you have given us less slots as Muslims in the government. You have put all elderly people who are not effective, and you are just deceiving, giving political icing, that kind of thing. Then you look at the divisions, even in schools. You are learning, and they say strictly these are Catholic schools. And even if they don't tell you, for instance, you cannot be, there are some universities I know, you can't be a grade president when you are not of that faith.
Yes.
Anyway, that is one. Because the truth of the matter is that religion, especially on the African continent, not being our own, the white man having come and told us that he has brought good tidings, telling us that we didn't actually have a God, and that the God he was teaching us was the most beautiful that has ever happened, and we must embrace that particular God. And I believe that probably that is what Chaine was coming to, and where he was coming from, has been used right from the colonial days up to now as a vehicle of division and separation rather than unity. Now,
okay.
The final one was, there was a religion, and also you mentioned
yeah, the issue, it was the issue of God and the of
that we make God.
Yes.
You see, like my senior brother Joshua Maponga, the Zimbabwean who is resident in South Africa, usually says, God a God who does not rhyme with the African culture, a God who I must use the African instruments to praise him and it will be devilish, a God that does not appreciate, and since he's the one, we believe God is a man, since he's the same God that created me in my African nature, that I put on in a certain way, I praise him in a certain way. If he does not appreciate the way he created me and therefore the way I praise him, then that God must not be mine. I must find my God. You see, we are getting complicated in here. And I think, but the general picture, I don't want to be stoned when I get out of this studio. The general picture is that the God is supreme and he created man. Conventionally, that's what we know and that's what I believe. But when we subject the Christianity in its present form to deep eschatological analysis, then it becomes very difficult for you to believe that the same God the white man is telling us is actually the God of Africa.
Yeah, because we have been looking at that, and of course, when you look at God, and for me, I've been saying this a number of times, that first of all, we need to differentiate between Christianity, for Christians, Christianity and religion.
Yes, absolutely. They are not the same.
Yes, then the other thing, even within the Islamic faith, we also need to differentiate between Islam as a religion and the Arabic culture. Because
unfortunately, if you are a Muslim and you do not practice it the way the Arabs, for instance, the God in Islam, or Allah for that matter, from what I have observed, to the extent that you cannot worship and communicate to that particular God in that area in the Arabic language, and more or less, because the language is part of culture, and more or less the practices in the Arabic way, then you are not communicating to that particular God. So he appears to appreciate only Arabic.
So that
but I don't want to venture there now.
No. So that is, of course, these are the other issues that we are talking about, that the demarcations must be clear, because this God cannot only be limited in space, in time, and even in language. Now, Rachel, you had something to say before we go on. She's shaking her head. Basically, the issue of whether religious is more is a dividing factor more than uniting, especially in the African
continent. And whether
continent.
we create our own God or the God is there is supreme.
I don't know whether the right thing to say should be divided or divisive. But, of course, religion by its nature, or faith by its nature, of course it's divisive.
Of course, now now you have thrown in another thing. There's faith, there's religion, there's
whatever you call it,
exactly.
They are divisive. For the simple reason that when you subscribe to religion, if you subscribe to an ideology, for example, or you subscribe to whatever way of thinking, that separates you from others. So of course,
the separation divisive. Must be distinctive.
Of course,
yes.
You have to say I'm of this faith. It of course makes you different from your neighbor. The attitude of your mind, your considerations, your priorities, of course they change.
Sure.
But I think for me, the real issue is a violent expression of one's faith. And I think that is where the Islamists today have become a major concern. Islam has been with us for a very long time. But the latest expression of the kind of Islam that consumes communities, not by way of persuasion, not by way of conviction, but by bloodshed, I think that is the real issue. When you have people who go over the top, that is really where the differences begin to become extremely concerning. For me, there is no contradiction in saying religion divides. Of course it does. Of course. Because what you believe is not what I believe. Yeah. For me, the only issue is, do I take a knife to your throat because you think in another way? Do I make it? We were speaking about this in a slightly different on a slightly different argument, and we're talking about the feminists. People who think or who believe that women need to have a fair shake, they're right. And this way of thinking or doing things is also not new. But we talked about a violent expression of that thought, or an extension.
The extreme.
Is really what, yeah, it is the extremes in religion and in faith that cause the issues, not the way of thought or doing things, in my view.
Now that you are talking about it, there was something that came up, and I think we're dealing on this because someone, one of or some of the viewers did raise some of this issue. That's why we're spending some time on that. It was, and I don't think we have ever talked about it, or maybe in passing, the issue, because you were saying, what do you people believe about abortion? And also, of course, another person talked about polygamy in the African context. So do you have an idea on that?
I remember you saying that some topics can take us up to half year.
Exactly.
And I think this is one of them. I think to do it justice, we would have to hone in concerning what particular issue, because there are many issues.
Yes.
There are the issues that come out of the, depending on even how it's practiced, of course. Ideally, me as a woman, I have nothing to do with that kind of marriage. It does not add to me as a person. In fact, it takes from my dignity. It really does. I like to think of myself not as an animal. I'm not an animal. So I don't expect to be treated as such.
No, but
when you herd me with others, you've reduced me to an animal, really.
I thought maybe that is a more respect that, and we have seen this happen in the context that what is wrong if I have my wife and they also call the elder wife, the junior wife, the senior wife, and others?
Let me answer it this way, to tell you how or what is wrong with that. I know you're married, or you have a wife. What if she, because some societies do this, what if she should also look for Peter, John, and Paul to add to your number? How does that feel?
That
to know how it feels. If your wife today should also get Peter, John, and Lazarus to be part of this union of yours, how does that feel to you?
Statistics now showing that the number of men in the globe are getting less and we have more women. How do we address that discrepancy?
It is a question of justice. It is a question of fairness. I asked you a question you're not answering. If you left here and your wife had also brought Peter, John, and Lazarus to add to your marital union, how would you feel?
Because we are few men, so...
You're not answering the question.
Have something to say.
Do I need to labor the point? If you're not being, if you don't feel fairly treated, neither do the women. There is no one who wants to share their better half with anybody else. I don't care whether the justification is cultural. I don't care if the justification is monetary. I don't care if the justification is intellectual. It does not feel good, and it cannot promote a healthy relationship.
Kenya, okay, here's something he's saying first.
No, of course I understand where my sister Takari is coming from. These are the liberated sisters that
because the other ones don't talk.
We have, and we must also admit that religion has done us a great deal in terms of taking away the African parts of and pieces of the African culture. It was because the question really where we would have started from is it a new thing that you should even call it polygamy? How does polygamy as a word play out in the African culture? What was it called, for instance? was it a shame? Was it something that would be frowned upon? No. A man in the African traditional society would take up more than one woman. And there was nothing wrong with it. That was part of the culture. Now, with the coming in of religion, Roman Catholic, and when you read books like Poor Christ of Bombay, you remember when they would invite you and they say you are going to be baptized, they would first of all say you have to renounce all the other women and remain with
one woman.
Some of this literature will help us to appreciate some of these things. So we now left parts and pieces of our African culture, and we surrendered them to the new forces of religion and also formal education. It is, for instance, not fashionable, and this is where my sister Takari is coming from, and understandably so. For an educated man to have more than one woman. Moreover, you are practicing, hear the word, practicing Christian. How do you have more than one woman? What are you saying? Which message are you sending? So, in other words, our culture, our African culture has lost its, certain parts of the African culture have been lost to the new invading forces of the white man's formal education and the religious way of doing things. You appreciate that. Now that we are here, and this is where I agree with Rachel, now that we are here, we have been captured, and this is how we are now. Yes, it will not be in order for a Rugarama here to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 under the umbrella of Christianity. It will not be under the umbrella of Christianity.
The absence of Christianity?
Absolutely. If we move into the African way of doing things, I'm certainly okay. I can have, in fact, it is pride to have many children. Now it is becoming a fashion that 2 children, somebody says, oh, you have how many? If you say 8, you say, hey, how do you manage that? For heaven's sake, what are you doing?
Because of the economics.
You see where we are, they bring in all sorts of things. Economics. Did you get all of them from your wife? You know, that's another question that also comes. So we must admit that our culture has been invaded by foreign forces of Christianity, of formal education, and our tastes and preferences have been shaped by the new forces, and therefore, when we have got emancipated, quote-unquote emancipated women, fronting arguments like it has got to be, if, for instance, a man is talking of getting more than one, then the woman should also have more than one man. Now you can see how we are getting into a lot of confusion. But this is where we are, and I'm saying we can do better. I think what we have to do is that whatever we have, if it is under Christianity and you have accepted to be a Christian, practice what Christianity teaches. If you are an African traditional society man, and this is how you have accepted to live your life, go with what the African traditional wife, if you have 20 children, in fact, if you have 50, have them, as long as you can look after them.
I think even before, Mr. Mututa, okay, you return to the fore, I'd like to say something about this. For me, it's not so much a cultural thing. It's not even an emancipation thing. It is a human thing. If you indeed want the same from someone else, you should also be willing to give them the same. In other words, this famed reference to in African traditional society, a man could take 6. Was it good for those women? Why don't I hear someone talking about the quality of that relationship? Is it just about the fact that this man could actually show that he has the muscle? Is that all there is? These women, are they not human beings? Remember, this is where we began with this whole thing about feminism and emancipation and so forth. Where it began is, by extension, by the way, in this same society you're talking about, in much of traditional Africa, women could not eat chicken. What had that to do with their being fellow human beings? Was that not an ego thing? They could not eat eggs and many other goodies. But what had that to do with the fact that, first of all, they're the ones who prepare these things.
They could not
they're even the ones who rear these things.
They could not even climb trees.
Well, there were all sorts of limitations. But why?
Anyway,
no, let me even finish. The limitations were meant to freeze them in the social hierarchy, to keep you from aspiring for better. This is about gleaning from other cultures, you may say from the Western culture, whatever, best practices. We are not about adapting things that are not necessarily good for us just because we can. If someone is saying to treat your wife in a fair way is a good thing, why should you stick to culture that is bad for her?
Supposing
that is really the argument.
Supposing I married 3 of them and I'm treating them fairly well.
It is not possible. Let me tell you why. It is not possible. You know, the followers of Allah, they say something about if you can treat these women the same way. But treating a person the same way does not mean you feel the same way about them. In fact, it's impossible to feel the same way about all these women.
So
what we are saying is...
What are you saying about Isaac recommending 4?
Not only 3, yes.
4. What is your opinion there?
My opinion is that I've been to parts of the Arab world. And in most parts, it is rare to find an Arab man with more than 1 woman. Okay. They have more money than we do. Do you agree they generally have more money than we?
Yeah, sure.
But their interpretation of religion means that they feel and they know that they cannot be just in every way to these women. Let me finish. Among those 4 women, someone who will know, everybody knows who the favorite wife is. Do you believe that to be the case?
No,
it means that even if there are 4 houses for all of them, each of them has a car, each of their children. The marriage is not about the materials you can provide. It's about a quality relationship.
I'm saying so, and I agree with you on that.
So you can't.
But...
And just a moment. To the extent that you're not being fair to the 3 because you love the one most, it is not right.
But you know, even let alone the issue that a man will have to marry a 2nd wife, 3rd wife, and the 4th wife, even when they are not of the Muslim faith, there must be reasons as to why a man jumps from one wife to another.
And I already said, now, Mr. Mututa,
those reasons are the ones that bring...
You'll forgive me, I'll have to interrupt you. Because really, I cannot let this one go. I started by saying, your wife, I don't know her, but I know that if I was to engage her, she would probably have a reason why Paul would be also good for her. But she decided consciously that that will not be. She will put all her efforts in making the best of this relationship. Why is that asking too much of a man?
What we are going to do is to subject...
Let me just have one comment about that.
I think we'll need to have a day.
Another, then we'll
discuss about issues.
Let me simply say, I agree with my sister Takari. You see, we are in times where we must accept that we have reached a stage where certain things must be done according to the dictates of the times.
Yes.
So discussing this subject in the times we are discussing it, she is absolutely okay. I have sisters, I have got or children who are girls. I certainly wouldn't want them to start competing with
other.
But the truth of the matter is, when we don't want to intellectualize this subject quite a lot. The truth of the matter is that under the African traditional society, which is still very prevalent, by the way, because we have got a lot of what you do in church is very different from, you see, the people will not come out to say, I have more than one. But in actual sense is that even the best of the, quote unquote, best of the practicing Christians have got more than one. It's the fact. They are there. Now, I do not want to say that is the correct way of doing things, especially if you are into Christianity, but that's what it is. Now, as far as the giving them equal treatment is concerned, and that has to do with the emotional attachment, absolutely Rachel is correct. It is near impossible, if not impossible.
It's impossible.
But the material, I mean, I can buy each of the 4 or 5 or whatever, if I have the means, vehicle, I can even adopt the same architect to build the same house. But at the end of the day, who told us that 4, 3, 1 was good, 4 was bad, 3 was bad? Who told us? Is that us? Us. Because the argument here is from my sister that it is a human thing. You see, when did we begin when did we start to become human?
Humanizing.
when we were told that the 3 was wrong and Father Drummond was preaching and converting the people in Paul Christoph Bomba, we must look at that.
Yeah, we'll have one time to discuss
so
this
you've been
issue.
an animal asking when did we become human?
Because the standard of being human,
the
according
problem,
to Christianity,
in fact, and we
is
discussed,
having one and feeling for her.
We discussed this issue last time, the issue of value as vis-a-vis the human rights.
Yes.
Now, when you are looking at the values, what does that entail? A human being, or what are the human rights? And that's why you are saying that why should it be that issue of polygamy? I'm not any promoting polygamy at any space, but why would it be that people are saying the West, the example, the best practices who are copying, should say that polygamy is satanic, but the issues of homosexuality is a human right?
What is the white man benchmarking from you?
Exactly.
The African?
So these are some
why
of the issues.
Why must I benchmark him?
Exactly. And why,
and by the way,
why the values should override each value and what they right. So
one of the reasons why I cannot say that polygamy is an exclusively, by the way, it is not exclusive to the black man or to the African. There is a society I'm thinking of. You're talking about religion, and these are the Mormons, and they live in the United States. It's mostly in the state of Utah. There, polygamy, the United States of America resolved to leave them alone. There, it is not something that causes heads to turn. They regularly practice polygamy, whoever wants. These are white people. Many of them have never been to Africa. I know they've never heard, or did not import your own thinking. So what I'm trying to say is that many of the things that we boil down to culture are just a human thing, not necessarily a cultural thing. It may be that in that part of the world, it was more prevalent than in other parts, but it exists in other parts as well. In fact, there is also a practice called polyandry,
yes,
where women collect men.
Here in Kenya, it is there.
I think even in parts of Ghana. But even that one is not good, because there is no, these men cannot be their best selves in this union. So from that point of view, it is not that I'm coming down on the African culture. I am coming down on virtues that take away from human good, is where I'm coming from. Now, if this woman sees her husband once in 2 months, what is good about that?
This discussion cannot even start here and not even end. But we'll have some time and we'll come with people who have experienced both the polygamy and the monogamy, and tell us in the African context what it means, and then what
will you bring some women also?
Yes,
Oh, yeah,
women,
sure.
of
You
course.
are here, and others will come.
No.
Women have to
Women
speak.
in polygamous.
Yes.
Do you remember, by the way, do you remember, Sister Takari, about it was the bill? Has it even been passed?
In Nairobi.
I'm here to know the bill here. The
Yes,
divorce,
marriage and divorce.
Yes.
Marriage and divorce. You even hear the name, marriage and divorce. You look at the contents there, and there were arguments. And who was defeating that bill, by the way? The senior women
yes.
themselves here in Parliament. They were defeating it several times. They defeated it, and yet when you look at some of the clauses in there, they were for
women.
Do you know why they were fighting it?
The very women themselves?
Yes. Do you know why?
See, of course, there is the same reasons, part of the same reasons that you had.
Yeah,
No. It is not the ones directly related to this argument. A woman MP is elected by who and who? Is it exclusively women?
No. Aha!
Other they know that other constituent, those other people, the other half, who feel very good and defend this thing, will not secure their place in Parliament.
Are you saying that women believe that men are entitled to polygamy? Why is that?
Let me be clearer.
Anyway,
these
let's
women
move to the next.
are responsive to their male electorate, who will defeat their cause to return to Parliament.
Why I say, well, we shall bring it one time back. I want to hear what women say about this issue of polygamy, and what law should provide. Because even legally, he will tell you, until recently, I think in Uganda, if you are found with someone's husband, you are supposed to pay a lot of, about how much?
It was nothing, actually. I mean, when you look at the payment, this adultery thing.
Yes.
Adultery was a mockery. There was nothing there.
Exactly.
People would go and commit that crime.
And of course, so these are some of the things that need to be looked at, both from the religious perspective. Religious is standard.
The truth of the matter is that society evolves. And if we must admit that African society has evolved to the extent that it is one man, one woman, so be it. Whoever wants it, take it. And those who are still there in the olden days to say, I can manage this, and they do not pretend to be Christians, please.
Can also have it. Other than,
the problem is pretense,
exactly.
in my opinion.
Sure. So today we started on those because this is some of the issues that some of our viewers had raised and wanted some clarification, and some of the discussions I think that are following them to find out what sometimes we believe. There is something that we have not touched on. I think we'll have time to talk about, and that will be the issue of abortion. I think there are many issues that also to do with abortion. What is abortion first of all, and then how do we handle abortion? Should someone be allowed to abort at will? And of course, there are legal issues, there are value issues, there are human issues, there are religious issues about the same. So that one, I think we'll also have time and look at it when we get time in the next episode. But today we are looking at a number of issues, and we are discussing about the recolonization of Africa. Muted, subtle, hidden, but is Africa undergoing a new wave of colonization? And we have seen this happen. And of course, we have a number of, especially in the beginning, the last 2 years, and this comes in when even this fights in Europe broke out. We have seen a lot of courting back on the African continent. It may look so friendly, but it can also be so dangerous unless the Africans themselves have to dissect and look at these relationships. But at some point, again, here we said, I think as Africans we're also failing to make use of these connections. If everyone is running to Africa, why should we not make use of these coatings so that Africa can benefit? The biggest problem we're having as Africa is that we are not a single entity, that we are divided in small countries, and each small country is trying to survive on its own and outsmart the other. So I'll go back to this discussion of Africa being recolonized. We're looking at Asia, China coming in, we're looking at America coming in, we're looking at Russia also coming in to see that Africa is a friend. Everyone is saying is a friend, but are we really friends? I think I'll begin with Rachel, with the issue of what you have been looking at about this issue.
I think this is shaping up to be quite a contest in terms of emerging powers especially. Mm-hmm. And I think we are reaching a place where the old world powers in the foreseeable future will no longer be the leading powers. I think we can safely say within the next 50 years the Western world will no longer be at the helm of global affairs. We have a very powerfully placed China. India is also sharpening itself for the race. These dynamics have spilled into the African scene. But I think it's more interesting that it's not just the big countries such as Russia, such as India or China, but smaller entities are also lining up for the kill. It would be interesting to note that Israel is one of those. Many of them are starting out in the soft power area, but they slowly occupy more space, slowly assert themselves as the days go by.
Sure.
Among them, and this one has really pushed itself to the fore in a fairly short time, is the Republic of Turkey. They say they are not Turkey. That was a Western way of pronouncing their country.
Yeah,
they now say they are Turkey.
They are neither Arabic, Asian, or European.
True. They are the gateway, really, of Europe.
Have they been admitted in the European Union?
Not really, but they are the gateway of Europe and Asia. And I think what makes Turkey even more interesting is that they're predominantly Islamic, and for their place in the world, that is in physical terms, that makes them quite an interesting entity.
Yeah.
But I was looking at Turkey in particular, and this particular country started positioning itself very, very seriously in about the mid-2000s, when they refined their foreign policy on Africa. Since then, they have increased their footprint by leaps and bounds. You can imagine that at the time, Turkey had a mere 10 embassies. But as we talk, they're pushing the 50 mark. They
in Africa?
Yes. Mm. But they also have their economic unit called DEIK, foreign economic arm of the Turkish government. And those ones have at least 45 locations on this continent. Turkey has also increased its engagement far from just soft terms. They have now graduated in terms of asserting themselves on the diplomatic level, investment, and of course we know about the railway or standard gauge. Uganda is courting them aggressively to make sure they make that come to pass. But they already have a big footprint in Somalia, for example. I was surprised to find out that the biggest embassy or compound of the Turkish diplomatic mission in Africa is in Somalia. And their biggest training base, military that is, here on the continent, is also in Somalia.
Even their budget for foreign military support.
Yes. So for them, they have gone from being spectators to actually advancing a step at a time. Education. There was an institution here, I think it's called Turkish Academy. I don't know if they are still at it.
Late Academy.
Okay.
One of the best
the best schools
okay.
in the town.
There's even an international school and hospital in this country. So Turkey has not just asserted itself in terms of extending medical assistance, educational support, diplomacy, but they're also now creeping into the military arena, security, their cooperation, UN, supporting AU initiatives.
You know, they had offered drones to Russia.
Yes, And they also have some few that they have dispatched to the African continent. But of course, at the end of the day, they also have the same objectives. They also want the money. They want our resources.
They want the cut.
So they come, you know, they are clocked in niceness. But we know at the end of the day, just like China, China came and they said they would not interfere in our affairs and that they understood they have also been oppressed. But we wake up and people like Angola and Kenya are
Malawi,
struggling for
Zambia,
dear life.
exactly.
Zambia, they say they have been overstretched, they were loaned too much money, and now their critical infrastructure is on the cutting block. So they come like that. But at the end of the day, they want what America wants, they want what Germany wants, and they want what Britain has always wanted.
Yes.
So what we are saying is that lately we have new suitors, same aim. They want to make sure they have their hands in our gold and in our silver, in our land. However the expression, these ones in particular are really, latching onto the religion bandwagon. That is why, among other things, I think Somalia is very attractive, because also they're predominantly...
Of the religion,
yes.
yeah, factor.
But there's also one important thing we forget, that Turkey, in olden days, was really the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
And Turkey has a
like
very old presence in Africa. As far back as the 16th century, they made their debut. But the difference is that they were in North Africa. And
mostly
their footprint is pronounced in places such as Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia, and Eritrea. They were there for a good 4 centuries, but in Northern Africa. And then they retreated about 1912, and they left whatever was they had done to the colonial powers of the day, the Europeans, that is.
And they were pushed away.
So it is only now that they are coming back, but they were here. Now they are spreading themselves to sub-Saharan Africa. Now they are spreading themselves beyond the cultural and the religious, which was really their mainstay in those days. And in fact, they were very big on spreading Islam to Northern Africa. But now they're saying, no, a true power is not just a cultural influence. It is not just a good feeling. It actually sinks its nails into the pie. So while we are watching China and we are watching America, we have forgotten Turkey. It is creeping up on us, and they mean business.
That's something in big, actually, because we have seen this happen, and other than now China, when you move in most of the arcades in Kampala, for example, I'm talking about Uganda, you find that a lot of clothing is coming from Turkey.
Absolutely. They are actually
Suits.
doing wonders when it comes to the textile industry.
Exactly.
And for them, they have they do it from their own country. You see, what happens is that majority of Europe now, when you look at German does a lot of solar production, but their solar energy is done from China. And now China has got a variety of solar products, but that technology is German technology. And the argument that China produces substandard goods is nothing but shallow. You must appreciate what China
that's what we can afford.
Produces. Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
Your money will dictate the quality of the product that you're going to get. Generally, Europe shifted majority of her production to China for a number of reasons, including labor. And that works for them. But also, China, unlike Africa, is very tactical, because you don't just produce from there and you leave them with nothing. They are very good at bargaining, and they have always taken a sizable share.
Because if you don't bargain, they will steal from you.
Of what is produced from there. But talking about Turkey, like
Turkey.
Rachel calls her.
No, that's what they say.
That's what they say they are.
Yeah.
No problem. But I've always known them as Turkey, but of course there are a number of pronunciation issues that we have with so many places, including them having pronunciation issues with African, on the African continent, our places. The truth of the matter is that, especially in, it's just not by the way, for Turkey, if I may just borrow 1 minute on Turkey, is like you correctly observed, the textile industry is one thing, the market is filled up, or especially the African market. Textile is Turkey. When you go, and this is very interesting by the way, when you go to these household items, the cutlery, and the carpets she just mentioned, the furniture. But there is another critical thing, and it is called healthcare. People are now referred to Turkey rather than India for medical attention.
Yeah, because India is losing out.
So that maybe goes back to what our senior brother, the late Kaisaka Same, the very first president of African National Congress, talked about Africa, the regeneration of Africa, in his paper that he presented in Columbia University in 1906. Now, the Turkish government is rediscovering or regenerating herself, because the power that she was centuries back is what she's trying to regenerate and also extend her tentacles. Because she is neither in the European Union, and if you ask me, there are other countries in the European Union which are not worthy, including Greece, that is heavily indebted, but of course we are not going to see the media talk about that. They do not measure anywhere near Turkey, but Turkey is not going to be admitted to the European Union simply because it is heavily Muslim. You see, and they don't want a lot to do with that. But we know that in terms of qualifications, if Turkey applied to be a member of the European Union, they should have been admitted as early as yesterday.
Sure. That
notwithstanding, the concept of recolonization of Africa is an old homework, in the sense that we have got this white man, in the words of senior comrade Patrice, Lumumba, not the Patrice Lumumba, our own Professor Lumumba here, who never left. And the fact that the colonial agenda, the neo-colonial agenda, is alive and well, it has got the backers and the fronters and the supporters, who in majority of the cases are actually running African governments. So what happens is that the neo-colonial project, the backers are everywhere in our institutions on the African government, ranging from finance, they are into politics, they are into all fields of agriculture, and they are going to be doing a lot of trade-offs. And when you look at some of the institutions that the African continent has built, you are going to see the handwork, the extension, what you used to call the invisible hand is no longer the invisible hand. It is now visible, unless you don't want to see what is happening.
Sure.
When you look at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, for instance, I mentioned here recently that we already have a hand, the British hand. They have already come with well over 30 billion ASD, and they have advanced it to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Reason, they want to have a controlling arm in that body because they know what it is going to bring. We have got a partnership that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area has entered into with China in terms of trading. They have also agreed to advance very substantial amounts of money to make sure that they lift that institution off the ground. And the reason is very simple. They want to have a sizable trading partnership and share in that large body. We agreed here, and this is very factual, that the intra-trade on the African continent is less than 15%. Now, if that is the case, then, and we have now all of a sudden agreed that we are going to trade amongst ourselves, because that's what the Africa Continental Free Trade Area espouses.
Yes.
We must, as a matter of fact, have the kind of partnerships that we are talking about. And talking about the partnerships, I think the one that has been struck between Africa Continental Free Trade Area and China is one of the best, because you can see that, fairly speaking, we are all benefiting.
So, viewer, wherever you are following us, you're watching us, we appreciate the time, and we're now going on for a short break. I know Ambassador Amuge, Mama Amuge in Ethiopia, is always a follower of this program. I know our embassy in Rwanda are always following us and giving us feedback. South Africa, the embassy in China, but also in the Sudan. So we appreciate the time you stay on your TV following this program, and also giving us feedback from wherever you are. We are going for a break now. We'll be back shortly, so please don't go away.
It's better to foster respect instead of fear and pain.
Cause a good school equals a better life.
Raising voices.
Every waking day is a reminder just how beautiful this, our land, truly is. The kind of beauty that you can only find here. In the lush green all around us and the wondrous sights within. It's what you feel in the gentle caress of tropical wind from the mountaintops. And the glow in your heart from a warm neighborly invite. It's in the distinct aroma of our cooking to the taste of food that takes you on a journey. In the sound of homecoming and the sound of motherland. In the magnificence we find on our travels and the exciting moments we experience. Ours is the kind of beauty that comes in all things big and small. our senses and truly enjoy what's uniquely ours. Explore Uganda, the pearl of Africa.
Yeah, welcome back from that break. Back to the Pan-African Friday program that looks at a number of issues that concern us, the people of Africa, the Africans who are living on this continent of Africa and beyond Africa. By the time we went for the break, we were looking at the influence of Turkey as a country on the African continent and how positioning, the position that they are taking to find themselves back in the times when the Ottoman Empire was still live and active on the continent of Africa. And mainly, much as the then influence was basically in the northern part of Africa, we see now that happening in the other parts of the continent of Africa. But away from that, you realize that China is becoming another force to look at when it comes to the influence in Africa. And we have seen China undertake a number of projects in this continent. Some of them are turning out to be controversial, but I think they're also another force that has benefited Africa. The problem of Africa is how do we position ourselves to benefit from all these influences? Are we still being exploited given our micro numbers as states, or we can have a way of coming together and push a position that is Africa? How can Africa have a foreign policy that will be beneficial to its people? Recently, when China appointed a new Minister for Foreign Affairs, I think the first countries that to be visited, the first trip outside of China after he was appointed the Minister for Foreign Affairs was Africa, and we have seen him travel a number of African countries. And I think I'll go to Ndugu Rugarama to give us a highlight on that. How does Africa stand to benefit from that visit of the Chinese Foreign Minister, the new one?
Ndugu Mtuta and our dear viewers, what happens is this. China has got a very unique way of dealing with her friends. And one particular way of dealing with her friends is to mind her business. What we used to have was the arrogant former direct colonial powers who, until recently, would dictate how we do business with them, including America. That they can go into their parliaments, they can go into their various influence offices and dictate the kind of commodities that are going to be traded and how much. So they become the price maker and the price taker. Now, the entry of China, especially on the African continent, and we must be reminded that the biggest trading economy, I think, is China now, if I'm not mistaken. Let us not be deceived by what we see on CNN and BBC. But what is so critical for Africa is that Africa has, for a very long time, wanted to lift herself off the ground in terms of major infrastructure investment. Now, the issues to do with the railway, issues to do with the roads, issues to do with seaports, issues to do with high power carriage to distance, long distance areas, are some of the investments that have not been done even when we had our partners in the former colonizers and America, the way Africa felt that they should be done. Because had it been the case, then I think that the majority, the biggest beneficiaries of, for instance, monies from International Monetary Fund and World Bank has been Africa. Don't forget that we get it at exorbitant rates.
Less than 40.
And my sister, Dr. Kana Chombori, has always had a very serious stake on the kind of monies we get from these financial institutions. No wonder that an alternative body has been proposed in the BRICS to cater for our interests. Of course, the African Development Bank has got her own limitations because the people who are putting in money are actually not Africans.
Exactly.
Now, that notwithstanding, China comes onto the fore and says, you do your politics the way you want to do them. We are not going to interfere with how you run your politics in your various governments, but for us, ours is that we must have a business in the respective countries, and we are also going to, and this is what we have always called soft power. You know, there's the soft power. And Sister Takari here mentioned Israel. Yes, although of course talking about Israel, that is, in my opinion, and that is a subject of discussion for another day, a satellite state for America. Because whatever she does, really, in majority of the cases, is to push. It could be pushing her agenda, having to refuse it, but it also pushes the American agenda on behalf of the rest of the countries. What America cannot directly do, they will also do it themselves, and it will be helping their cousins who are Americans. But China has come into Africa and has upstaged the former colonial powers. In the sense that when you look at the trade levels, the trading levels, the kind of the volumes that we trade with China are much higher than the volume of trade that we do with, for instance, the Western Europe and America. And the trend is not about to change. And that's why you see the trade race, if I may call it the trade race. Because now we are trading. It is no longer what it used to be in the past. Although, of course, the balance of trade is still shambolic.
Exactly.
We still have issues there. But you can see now we are talking about trade. And the kind of trade that we used to do, which was dictated upon by the powers that you, for instance, now America says, you are going to produce, this is what I'm going to take, and I'm going to pay this. The tone now, China comes and says, when I talked about the agreement which Africa Continental Free Trade Area has struck with China, is you can see a lot of respect. And that is not to say that we do not have where China has come onto the African continent, gone into Zambia, for instance, Zimbabwe, some countries, I understand, Uganda, there was a lot of talk that the entire airport has been taken. Then
even Kenya, this
social media.
has issues.
Yeah. So you can. I'm not in any way suggesting that we have got a lot of newfound love that respects Africa a lot, that we are benefiting 50-50. The truth of the matter is that China also has got her own issues, and we have got complaints, especially when it comes to the way we strike our agreements. But that has got a lot to do with us also.
Yes,
because we are not good at negotiation.
No, but even we are good at negotiation. Now, the part of, I think some of the three issues that you raised, including that we are now trading more with the China than the Europe and
the rest of the Western Europe. And the
reason, for the simple reason, is that these guys have now made China their katwe. They have moved all the workforce in China.
The production lines.
Exactly. The only thing that China produces for them, but also produces for the other markets.
You see, what is even worrying is that, and God forbid, when you look at the majority of the African economies now, assuming China one time woke up and said, we are no longer supplying Africa certain commodities, the entire continent would be in problems. But China is not about to do that. And that shouldn't be the direction of our debate. The direction of our debate is that we have got China, and this is very good for Africa if we can take advantage. Sure. The advantage I'm talking about is that when you have got the alternatives, then, and everybody is competing for your resources. Because I can assure you, I had the chairman, I was listening to some cable news last night, and the president of the European Union was complaining, saying that we have got money to undertake heavy infrastructure development on the African continent, but we are not going to risk our money on the African continent, do the roads, when, for instance, we don't have the strong trading partnerships with the respective governments on the African continent, whereby the commodities that are going to pass on that road, we don't have a controlling arm. That was the complaint. Now that tells you that when the European Union is coming to negotiate with Africa, now that we have got such a body as Africa Continental Free Trade Area, that European Union will think twice how they should negotiate with us, and the terms that we must agree upon must be the terms that also please us. Now, what is unfortunate in there is that we have got a breed of, or a crop of Africans who unfortunately have been captured. Like I said last time, they look like you, in terms of color, like me, but they are not us. They are not us in the sense that they sell and they have continuously sold because of the way of training, the way they have been trained, to the extent of indoctrination, and they are going to have forces. You see, what happens is that the majority of the appointments, who becomes a technocrat somewhere, governor, central bank, something. We talk so highly about some of these central banks that we are talking about here. There's nothing like, what can our central bank, for instance, here do? What sort of currency are we having? What are we commanding here? This is absolutely nothing. The thing that rules is the dollar. Exactly. And that is why we are talking about having a body like a body on the African continent that is going to harmonize all these African currencies so that we can have a currency that is uniform, that will enable the trade on the African continent.
Yeah, because talking about the road, even if you made a road from in Uganda, that road is not going to factor in the volumes of trade with Europe or another country. It means you will need to have the road like the one which is suggested from South Africa to the sea, so that you at least that makes a lot of economic sense. But at the same time, I think these smaller ones, like Malema said, you cannot unite Africa by dividing it into smaller blocks. But I think that is where the African Union comes in, and most of these programs like the African Free Trade Area comes in handy, so that Africans for once can sit down and negotiate as Africans, not as smaller entities on the African continent. Rachel, do you think that this man's visit to Africa, of course when he visited, he has countries like Ethiopia, Gabon, Benin, Egypt, and which other ones that he visited? Do you have, do you believe that this visit is going to influence Africa, China more, and does Africa anyway stand to benefit from these visits?
Of course, the visit of a foreign leader is an icing on the cake. It cannot be of consequence unless there are other mechanisms that are already at play. And of course, China has been heavy on starting out the Turkish way, which is mutual cooperation, diplomacy. They seem harmless, you know. Education, they offer you scholarships. Health. I remember there used to be a Chinese medical mission for many, many years in the hospital in my hometown. And that mission was there funded fully by the Chinese government and so on. And they used to attend to those things that local practitioners could not do. But even that is soft power. So when the foreign minister comes, he's only adding to what is already at play. He's adding to the presence that has become the Chinese mainstay, infrastructure developments across the continent, soft loans, low interest rates, foreign direct investment. They have perfected the art of not seeming to be of any real consequence while consuming everything that they can. It's the Asian way to actually seem like you're not really doing anything while doing a lot at the same time. You don't really make noise, you don't seem to move around a bit, yet you've been to every corner.
Exactly.
So the Chinese way of doing things, and that is in fact why I have taken an interest in the Turkish model, they're similar. And maybe because they have some Asian ways of doing business. But I was looking very seriously at the fact you're looking at a foreign minister from China, and of course he's only the latest one, but it has become the way that whoever assumes that office first heads to Africa. But you'd be interested to find out that Turkey is doing better. Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey, has been to Africa 30 times. 30.
And there's a reason.
Of course.
But of course, that also comes on the heels of, other than the Chinese foreign minister, we also have had the U.S. foreign minister also, visiting Africa, Secretary of State visiting Africa. And when he came, I think it was South Africa, Congo, Rwanda. And of course, they were talking about the issues of Congo conflict. But of course, at the bottom of it, you know where the hand is going into the minerals in the Congo. But also,
not only that, that visit came hot on the heels of this BRICS arrangement.
Yes. Where
South Africa had agreed to do joint military exercises with Russia, among others.
Of course.
But it's not as if it's a recent thing. They've been doing these military exercises, but I think it was surprising to America that South Africa has chosen to actually do this when they are demonizing China, demonizing Russia. But I think it is a sign of the times.
Rachel, that they should have to be serious there. You know that South Africa is a member of BRICS and Russia is a member there. And part of what unites them is to carry out some of these arrangements like we're talking about.
Yes,
so why would America really be...
Before you would be shy about doing some of these things because you felt like this one is the bigger brother, this one is the heavier weight. So if I offend him, what happens to me tomorrow? But I think...
You're reminding me of the story of there's something that we've been hearing here, of one who comes in will pay money for your hair, another will pay money for your rent, another one will pay money for your transport. So you will look at the priorities, say, maybe this one will give me more. So if he's coming in, I would rather be careful that there's another person coming in. But other than that, we also...
I think the African bride is that attractive.
Exactly.
Today you smile with the Turkish, tomorrow you smile with the Indian, the third day with the Chinese,
exactly.
The fourth day with the American. I think the African bride is ripe for the taking. How we do this, definitely the suitors are smelling good things. Everyone is really having an active way of engaging with this continent.
Exactly.
And I think what we do with this will define where we go for the next generation.
Foreign policy. Africa needs to have a strong foreign policy.
United, moreover.
Yes, and that policy can only be formulated at the level of the continental arrangement. But individually, like Nduguru Garama put it, we because some of the people, we are hearing stories coming from most of these African countries that whoever becomes a president must have had a hand somewhere, a quiet hand pushing someone to say, we need this one, we need, and if people need that person, then there's a reason as to why they need them. But at the same time, you know, this happens at the, again, a few months when the Russian foreign minister was here also, moved a number of countries, and Uganda was one of them. Ethiopia was one of them. Now I've seen the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans, all these countries. There are at least a number of common countries that are visiting: Ghana, Ethiopia, and South Africa, the Congo. You know, that corridor. But that also gives you, as we speak, I think you remember the UN. American UN ambassador was here, also visited Uganda after Ghana, and visited Uganda. And in January, this month, she came back, visited Ghana, and the Secretary of the Treasury, as we speak, I think also ended her visit in the South African part. So when you look at this, and for me, I would prefer that to this issue of saying, you come, the African heads of state come here.
they can no longer, they can no longer do that. The only time probably one can state that they have come close to that is the recent African-American leaders summit that happened in, was it Washington?
Yes.
Yes. Now, why? Simply because the competition is stiff. You see, what was the preserve of Europe or America can now be undertaken by China, and they will do it without strings, a lot of them for that matter. Because they know that, for instance, if Africa also speaks, and this time they have got avenues through which they can speak jointly, one voice, then another power. For instance, here we are talking about Turkey coming up to say we are going to finance the rail gauge of Tanzania, you know, a single country like Turkey. If Turkey, for instance, wants to do that, and remember the late Pombe Magufuli was one such a man that wasn't interested. He had a way of mobilizing money. That was not his nature. Now we lack, and because of our extremely limited levels of intra-trade, and our almost poverty-stricken or dehydrated African Development Bank, we cannot get money from there to undertake those heavy major investments, yes, like the rail gauge that we are talking about. You will find that even the flyovers you see here, it will have to be Japan that is going to do the flyovers around Kampala, because we don't have that kind of money. Not that we don't have the capacity to generate it, but simply because we had not yet come together to increase trade amongst ourselves and have the revenues and have the bank like African Development Bank where we collect our money and we borrow from there. The alternatives we have had in the past has been to go to World Bank, and we know who World Bank is anyway. Then we pick their money and we pick it at such a high interest rate. We come and undertake a venture which unfortunately in majority of the cases does not bring returns, so that we are perpetually indebted, and this vicious circle continues. Now what I want to say though is that in all this, the neo-colonial agenda has been a little bit checked, especially it coming from the sources that we knew historically. Because what happens is that now the promotion of the neo-colonial agenda has been through what the former directly controlled colonies do economically, and majority of the projects now that are being undertaken are not necessarily sponsored by their former colonial masters. This new model, this new arrangement, with some trappings like we have already observed from the new suitors, like China, and Turkey must also be having her own issues. I don't think they just bring in money. But you see, now our ability to sit back and say, wait a minute, I have been borrowing from World Bank, and these have been the terms, and I have not benefited anything. Now, for you, what are you bringing? Okay, I think this one I take, this one I take, this one I take. Now, the unfortunate part has always been that we have had a crop of managers in different sectors of our economy who actually do not have Africa at heart.
Exactly.
What happens is
including leaders at the top.
Absolutely. Now, those ones are worse. I told you that without mimicking my words, that we may have a sizable, we actually do have a sizable percentage of the African heads of states who are actually spies of the former colonial masters. They have been put there, and their arrangements
Mr. Paul Biya,
to make sure that they stay there. That name has also been mentioned, and of course he's not alone.
No, but
you see, when you have that kind of arrangement, where the African leaders are nothing but ears and eyes of the former colonial master. You saw what was happening, for instance, in Ivory Coast.
Yeah.
They create chaos. The French government comes in. They remove one president. They indict him. Yes, they indict him. Then they remove the charges after the, you know. And you see, and that game has been going on like that. Then they influence who becomes the president of International Criminal Court. So all the things we see, and we seem not to come up and say, no, we have had enough of this, and we must change.
Exactly. But if we had leadership of Africa at the apex, I think that would be a more complicated issue for them. But having to influence an election in a smaller country in any part of Africa is very easy, because you can manipulate and play. We hear now many stories coming out from all these elections.
They print your money, they print your ballot papers.
They educate
they educate. Actually, let me say this also. The research that we have, majority of the research that we have on the African continent is not your research. Even when they are researching about domestic violence, it is not for your consumption. Tell me, Makerere University has got more than 4 major research centers. How much of her research products have been consumed, internalized in the policy formulation and implementation on the Ugandan government?
Exactly.
How
just
much?
the other day.
What is the feed? What is the feed-in?
Just the other day, President Museveni actually tasked National Drug Authority and said they need, as a matter of urgency, to make sure that they convert the trees, some of the trees in Chibale forest in particular, into medicinal, what can I say? Into drugs that we can put medicinal value. Yeah. As in, why should we do everything in the book to make sure the drug supply from China is secure, the drug supply from India, the drug supply from Germany, and yet they are perfectly potent, curative assets in this very part of the world.
I think we'll subject that to another discussion another day of how has Africa been living without some of these drugs that have become now cancerous, most of them that we're using from the rest of the world, than if we used our own. But I think his point again comes in that African problem is mainly the leadership, and then this leadership across the aisle. We have people, the technical people, who are advising government on some of the things. Now, when you also have leaders at the apex who rely mainly on the advice that are given by people who have been sponsored, trained, and equipped, yes, from the West to come and promote and propagate what they have been told, it becomes very, very, very tricky. So now we are looking at a number of these quotings, people coming to Africa, say, when you do this, we shall do this, when you do this, when. Now, if what was done at the apex, and for me, I prefer and pray to see that day, when these issues, when an American head of state is coming to Africa to talk about issues with the African leadership, not necessarily some small boy who has just been able to be elected as a president somewhere and is trying to look for survival, so that, because you made us laugh when you were talking about your friend Bia. Because you look at this man who more or less is now insane. But there
was another one in Algeria not very long ago, until the people of Algeria said enough. This man was basically on life support, but someone was keeping his chair.
But are you aware the ones who brought him, the Wananchi are the ones actually who brought that old man back, by the way?
Yes.
And the argument was that they have been let down by even the younger generation.
Exactly.
They brought him back until he just, for some strange reasons, you again lost the seat. The point really here is that the recolonization of Africa, like it was postulated by Professor Mumba, is going to happen or is already happening simply because Africa has refused to get united. And the warning signal was sent by, in 1961, even in Casablanca, even before the 1963, was sent by senior comrade Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who said, please, let us not get comfortable in our small countries as presidents.
Exactly.
Let us unite now. We leave this place, making sure that at least now, and he repeated it at the African Union in 1963, one army, one currency, so that we can have foreign ministers from amongst ourselves. And
exactly.
The independence of a country like Ghana is meaningless unless the entire continent is independent. But at the same time, let's have that people like the Dakus and what have you, Central African Republic, the Bangui being proposed as the capital of Africa, or maybe Brazzaville. All those things, of course, the Casablanca group was defeated, as you are aware. The Monrovia group of the Julius Nyerere's, they are the ones who won, and they came up with the Organization of African, which was just a loose coalition. But the most important thing is that then we allowed the neo-colonial projects to set in.
Exactly.
And the brand of the people who were to stop the neo-colonial agenda, smartly and systematically, they started on eliminating them. Look everywhere. Ben Bora was eliminated. Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown through a coup. The Patrice Lumumba, that one didn't even attend. He was assassinated by a combination of Belgium government and CIA. The likes of in Guinea, Conakry, he was also removed, and later on, of course, assassinated. You look at Algeria, the same story. Look at Egypt, Abdul Gamar, he was also removed and died. You see, that crop, therefore, that would have stopped, and they had the agenda of making sure that the neo-colonialism does not penetrate, as had been prophesied by Kwame Nkrumah. They were eliminated, and those who came onto the political scene were people who were to support and perpetrate the neo-colonial agenda. And from that time, Africa has been struggling, push away the neo-colonial project, without a lot of success.
Yeah, because the other issue is that the leaders then who came after those had learned lessons. You are either going to work with us or die. So now the new leaders were wary of their survival, but also at the same time they were brought, someone is helped to get to that level. Now when he gets there, of course he has to dance to the tune. But I think there is also a chance, there is a window that Africa still can push its agenda.
The window is there if we can make sure that the institutions, the African Union institutions that have been established, like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, is not penetrated by the bean weavers and the spies, is taken advantage of. We speed up and increase the intra-trade. We are going to make sure that at least we generate our own money by making sure that we put a lot of money in the African Development Bank to have our own money, by making sure that directorates such as Science and Innovation at the African Union is given the kind of urgency and attention that it deserves. We are going to get it correct.
Exactly. Yes.
I think there is something I'd like to say in relation to what Nduguru Garama has just said. None of these things that we're talking about are accidental. For me, like I said, I've been very much interested, and I return to the Turkish model. There is a very deliberate move to where they want to go. And the good thing about the Turkish model, the latest anyway, is that it can be studied going back 15 years, not very long. Forget about the North African one of centuries ago. This one has been ongoing since about the mid-2000s. But since that time, we're talking about the resources he's talking about. Since that time, foreign direct investment of Turkey is at $10 billion. When we talk about their trade and business with this African continent, it has risen in 20 years from about $3 billion, tenfold, to about 30 as we speak. Turkish Airlines goes to 61 destinations in 40 African states. This is within 15 years. To make sure that the people that will propagate their agenda can go where they need to go part-time. These are deliberate strategies. When you talk about providing foreign direct investment, it means that the person who volunteers to build a railway in Tanzania, in Turkey, and the one who volunteers to work with Uganda to build their part of the standard gauge, has the financing. The heavyweight financing is talking about. The Turkish government is saying, look, whoever wants to to pioneer our return to that continent, will finance it. These are deliberate things.
China does the same.
These are people, as I said, stretching back to about 2008. They had about 10 embassies in all of Africa. Now they've increased by 4.5 times.
Exactly.
It is a very deliberate. So for us, what happens to us as Africans, we want to sit and talk until morning. There is no strategy. There is no calculation. There is no investment. There is no cooperation. These are people, the Turkish people, they have entrenched themselves at this time in at least 7 locations.
Yeah, because one of the, like we discussed last time, one of the biggest problems that we're having, especially on the African continent, is the unreliability of the leaders, but also the way the leaders find themselves in. Because if you are going to be a leader at the helm of the African Union, but still back at your home country, you are having issues, you don't even have the time to settle and say, now, I think this is what we need to move. Maybe even the arrangements at the African Union need to be changed a bit so that the mechanism can be more live and active than when people come, sit and go. But I think in all fairness, there is a new way now the African Union is doing its things as compared to the past. That if we can see this move and happen, then maybe already we, like you are now, last time you were talking about the East African Central Bank. If we can have the East African Central Bank working, if we can have the West African Central Bank working, at one point these banks become a network of the African central banks under the African Union. I think that will be able to work. In other words, what we are looking at is if Africa is to survive, we need to have a leadership on the continent.
True. And I think even before that leadership comes to pass, the question should become, how is it that foreigners who don't share much in common with us can come and establish themselves in a viable way? How come that these people can establish themselves really in a strong fashion? They do so in Congo, they do so in Central African Republic. You don't have a diplomatic mission there. You don't speak the language, any language there. You don't know anyone from... How can someone from Russia come and start doing their things in Mali where they don't speak their languages? They don't... Really?
Yeah, because
the challenge is on us.
Exactly. Talking about the same, what Africa needs to do is now to avoid this wastage. Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, well, we all have embassies in every country. I mean, congested in those countries. But what difference do we have in terms of foreign policy? And which interests do we have that are far different from each other? And yet, if we said now, okay, for example, for East Africa, let's have one ambassador for all these countries in this. We have seen this in the countries of EU now. They're trying to patch themselves together, that they have one mission that can cater for the interests of the European Union. Such an establishment will be well facilitated, but also more focused. But when you look at Africa, this duplication, I think at one point, I think Garama also wind up on us.
Okay. Maybe in Ndugumututa, we also need to look at with all due respect, really, we need to look at whom we send as an ambassador to some of these...
the quality, yes.
Yes, we need to interrogate that. And I'm not saying anything, please don't... I hope the public will get me correct here. I'm saying that we can improve. We can improve who our ambassadors are, such that they are able, they are vested with capacity, intellectual and otherwise, to engage those countries where they are, as far as trade and other relations are concerned. Although, of course, somebody will tell me about the technical team whom they move with, but our mouthpiece is the ambassador. So I will leave that one at that. But what, as you said, I wind up, we seem to be racing against time. The truth of the matter is that the neo-colonial agenda and the a wave to kind of come back to the African continent and take her over this time around is not necessarily how it happened when the 1884-85 Berlin Conference took place, and they decided to slice Africa into parcels, and the Belgians, the Portuguese, the Germans, the English took the spheres of influence as it was at that time. But this time around, they have come in a manner that was prophesied by Kwame Nkrumah, whereby that if Africa is not united to confront the monster called the neo-colonial agenda, then we are going to be infiltrated, and they are going to take advantage of our disunity. They are going to build on these scholarships we are talking about, tokenisms here and here and there. They are going to make sure that our centers of unity are going to be magnified, including the region we are talking about here, to be used as a dividing tool, such that we may look and appear to be different from each other, so that the enemy can take advantage of us and continue to exploit our resources and make us heavily dependent on him for purposes of enriching himself and keeping our wananchi in that perpetual state of poverty and sadness that Africa has witnessed for a very long time. We have a potential power, but we cannot eat potential. We must transform that potential into the reality and this is what was happening, because now DRC is supposed to be the hub of medicine, but all that Africa has been exposed that we are weak, because if nothing else has actually exposed us, like Kumumba says, it was COVID. It shows that we are heavily dependent on the rest of the world, because if nothing comes from the rest of the world, then we are wiped out as the African continent.
Sure. Rachel?
I think from the latest scramble for Africa, and I don't think there's another way to put it. And by the way, some of the powers that we are overlooking, but who definitely have an intent, are the Middle Easterners, our not very far neighbors. UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia also have their eye on this prize. But I think if there is something that we can carry from our experience with the colonizers of old, we have new ones, but the ones of old, the fact that there is no person from across the shores who will ever have the African interest to the degree that we do. They may smile, they may be soft-spoken, they may seem harmless, but they are far from harmless. If they build a railway, it will be after the original colonial order, where it is to transport your products in raw form to European markets for processing. In other words, there is no charity about this. These are hard-nosed entrepreneurs. They may come as teachers and seem that they really want to educate your children. But at the end of the day, of course you can glean an education, but that is not the purpose. The purpose is to occupy the space and to stay there and to give you the crumbs. That is the lesson we have to internalize.
Thank you so much, people. Thank you so much, our viewers who have been with us since we started this program about 2 hours ago. It has been a long time. It has also been nice being with you. I'm told there will be later on the release of PLA results later today by UNEB, and I think when that happens, UBC will be taking you there to get the results released. I know a lot is to be said about Africa, and we can only say so much, but we don't want to stop only at the talking. A lot can be done when we work together as Africans, and a lot can be done when we appreciate our weaknesses, but also that we have the strength that we can use in pushing the African agenda, that one time Africa will be fully independent in terms of survival. Thanks so much, the viewer. Also want to thank our technical team that has been working behind the camera and the machines to bring you this program. We'll end it up there, and we'll be back next week on Friday, same time, with the same program of Pan-African Friday, but we shall continue interacting through the platforms. We thank you so much for being with us and for your time watching UBC. I will thank you again.